Dr. Sivaram is the Executive VP of Memory Technology for Western Digital. He's responsible for the ongoing development of the company's NAND flash memory, as well as its next-generation technologies, including 3D NAND and 3D ReRAM. Dr. Sivaram has over 30 years' experience working with semiconductors, 3D memory architectures, process technology, equipment, and materials. He's held executive positions at Intel and Matrix Semiconductor and at Sandisk after its acquisition of Matrix. Under his leadership, Sandisk has created the world's first cross-point 3D memory technology, the world-leading 15-nanometer 2D NAND technology, the industry's first 256 gigabit, 3-bit per cell, 48-layer 3D NAND chip, and recently the world's first 64-layer 3D NAND technology. Please welcome Dr. Sivaram.
Thank you, Rich.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's usually a little difficult getting started after lunch and people getting settled down. So hopefully you had a good lunch and don't snooze. We're going to be talking about this brand new class of memories called storage class memories that are coming in. Technologies get incorporated for various reasons. Many of you probably have heard the story about how railroad tracks, the space between the tracks, how it got defined. It came from stagecoaches where two horses had to be drawing the stagecoach. So in the end, the space between the tracks is defined by two horses' rear ends. So we don't want our technologies to be defined by horses' rear ends. We thought we'll go through some logic of what makes storage class memories and how do we choose them. So when I agreed to do this talk, I was still running the memory technology development for Sandisk. And since that time, the venerable Sandisk name is now a Western Digital brand. So Western Digital now is a proud owner of all three of these brands that you see in front of you: Sandisk, Western Digital, and SJ4000. The big advantage now is that we give what the customer wants as opposed to creating this false choice between flash and hard drives. I see among you there's a lot of you who are coming to the storage world from either of these sides. I see Tom Coughlin sitting right in front of me, who's a storage guy from the hard drive side who is actually running this conference. So there are many who have come on both sides, and we as a company made the choice that it is best when we give the customer what they need for the applications that they need. So as we go forward, we want to bring possibilities of data to life, whatever we need to do. So there are many companies in the storage space. You see some of the smaller companies farther to your left, Intel and Micron and NetApp, etc. Even Samsung and Toshiba. Together, Western Digital is today the largest storage company in the world. Today, I want to repeat that. Western Digital is the largest storage company in the world. The muscle of that large a corporation and its technological prowesses, where are they going with respect to storage class memories, is what I want to take you through. So the rest of the talk is going to be pivoted on this one piece of data. 40 zettabytes of data are going to be created in year 2020. Zetta is not something that you normally know as a prefix. Think of it as there are 8 billion human beings on Earth, men, women, and children. Every one of them, if they had 10,000 DVDs of Star Trek movies, that's how much data is produced every year. 10,000 DVDs for every man, woman, and child in the world are going to be created in the year 2020. What are we going to do with the data? How do we visualize the data, commercialize the data, mine the data, monetize the data? How do we do that? So that's the basic problem we are trying to solve. This is a flash conference. Almost everyone in this room knows this basic architecture. This is the von Neumann paradigm of computing, where you have a central processing unit, and then you have data that needs to be fetched for it. The closest point to the processor is the level 1 cache, which is right there. Small amount of it, very fast in the nanoseconds of access time. And then the level 2 cache goes a little farther, and then the embedded memory, the level 3 cache, which is of the order of few megabytes, but it's very expensive. Every memory, as you get closer to the processor, gets more and more expensive. The first time you go off the chip is with DRAM. DRAM is of the order of 100 nanoseconds, but it's still expensive. Compare that with storage. So everything on the left side you call memory. Everything on the right you call storage. Right? And storage is plentiful, relatively inexpensive, but slow. So this whole conference happened because we managed to put something in between there. We managed to put something in there that is much, much faster. You can handle this 40 zettabytes of data between hard drive and with flash. However, there is still that chasm. Flash has made things much faster, but it's still storage. So given the amount of data that is out there, this data is from Simon Wong from Stanford. He shows that if you now have a conventional application on which a process is running in a regular von Neumann kind of a thing, most of the time when you try to access the cache, 99% of the time you get it. And about 10% of the time is done in data transfer. But if you now go into big data applications, what happens now is 90% of the time you miss. You don't find the data you want in the cache. 96% of the time, the processor, all it is doing is shuttling data. It is not actually crunching. It is not actually doing processing. This is the problem. As data grows, as huge amounts of data come in, as your teenage children start taking pictures and videos and storing them, and we now have to access this video, this is what happens. So people are starting to look at very, very different architectures called data-centric architecture. This is one that Intel has proposed, the rack scale architecture, where there is a pooled memory in the middle, very fast memory, storage class memory, which bunch of servers over a fabric access and work with it. Or HP is proposing the machine. The machine is again a huge, very fast memory in the middle, and the processors, many, many, many of them, all around that access that vast amount of data in a completely different architecture. And you can see in mobile the same thing is happening, desktop things are happening. As new memories come in, these kinds of architectures start to come in. However, everything is built from building blocks, and our building blocks are semiconductor components, NAND, DRAM, etc. So this is DRAM's cell size over time. It's doing well. It's a log scale, and you can see it starts to level off. About 2003, 2004, NAND started becoming cheaper than DRAM. And then NAND went to 3 bits per cell, and voila, now today, if you looked at it, it is 30 times the cell size difference. 30 times is how far we have gotten. 30x difference as a proxy for the cost. NAND has gotten that much cheaper than DRAM, and when you need the cache and you need to have a large amount of DRAM, because you have a large amount of storage data that is coming in, you are stuck. So the building blocks are not scaling. The memory side of the building block is not scaling. So what we need to do? This is a problem we've been fighting for a long time. On the memory side, I have been in this business now, this is my 4th decade. Intel was founded in 1967 to make DRAMs. DRAMs and SRAMs were there in the 60s. To this day, there is no other new memory on the left side of this graph. We are now trying to say we need to bridge that gap, and we are trying to create something called a storage class memory. A storage class memory that is reasonably less expensive compared to DRAM, and probably a little bit more expensive than flash. That gap is very important. Currently, the DRAM to flash gap is 30x. How do I bridge that gap? You can't go too far from NAND, you have to go far enough from DRAM. That's the problem that we are trying to solve. So when we do put that in, you saw earlier today there are announcements. You can make, when the access time is very slow, you can make a fast SSD. Or you can extend it to the DRAM. When you go more and more onto the memory side, that's when the action starts to heat up. Then you can start to replace the DRAM with a non-volatile memory. Now you can start to have mobile applications, and then later on when a universal memory is created, we can get into an IoT kind of application, and the market takes off. Internally, we believe that when that happens, when I can go into a DRAM replacement and a universal memory mode, I can get to tens of billions of dollars in this market. That's the motivation behind storage class memories. Clearly, because there is such a motivation, there is a lot of research everywhere. These cells have been around a while. If you looked at this graph, which shows access time on one side and cost on the other, bottom left is goodness. You want to have the slowest access time and the cheapest memory. There isn't anything there, right? So we have now some choices. Resistive RAM is one of them. Phase change memory is another. Conductive bridge memories are coming up. These are trying to identify a space called storage class memories. That bridge, that gap, that chasm that I was talking about. You need to take a few minutes to absorb this. All 4 of these characteristics, cost, scalability, scale, which is different from scalability, and I'll show you that, and ecosystem, those 4 are equally important for a memory to succeed. Even Ringo is important. When they play together, that's when the interaction happens. It's a virtuous cycle when they take off of each other. When one riffs, when the rhythm comes from someplace, when the melody comes from someplace, we need to put that together. So the Fab 4 of any semiconductor product, take it from me, you need to have all 4 of these. You need to have the right cost. It is not a point in time. You can have the cost once, but is the cost going to keep going down over time? Do you have a path to scale? And then scale of manufacturing, that's what you need for the cost. How large, how big an infrastructure, how large is the production volumes that are going to be to reduce the cost? And then is there a place to put all this out? Is there an ecosystem that is ready to receive all of these? All 4 are needed. You can take the example of NAND. Of course, as Sandisk before, now as Western Digital, in NAND we trust. Over the last 20 years, the cost of flash has come down by 50,000 times. If you had bought a Mercedes in 1996 for $50,000, if they had had scaling like this, you could be buying it for $1. Right? I mean, you can see the innovations that have gone in. Line width shrink is one. We went from NOR to NAND, from single SLC to MLC, MLC to TLC, and so on and so on and so on, so that in the end, on a planar NAND, we could make a 128 gigabit on a 15 nanometer X3 cell. That was in 2015 when we announced, and that is still the smallest die for 128 gig in the market today. Along with it goes something very interesting, the scale of manufacturing. This, when I saw this, I was very surprised. This is 1 year out of our fab in Yokkaichi. With our partner, Toshiba, we run a fab, and in that fab in Yokkaichi, Japan, the annual output of wafers, just 1 year's output of wafers, how tall do you guys think it is? Just to give you a scale, when we put something next to it, that's the Eiffel Tower. And that is Burj Khalifa. That's the tallest building in the world. And that is Mount Fuji. For you to get the same scale as 1 year's output out of this one set of fabs in Yokkaichi, out of Sandisk and Toshiba, you need to have a mountain the equivalent of Mount Kilimanjaro. That I call scale. For you to get the cost that you do in your USBs and in your SSDs, for you to get that, you need that scale. You can't do it in a half a fab or a quarter of a fab. So we talked about how we scaled and how we reached scale. And what made that possible is this cell. And this architecture shows you in a perspective, word lines in the middle, bit lines up on top, very, very well-known NAND architecture. There are no contacts in the middle of the array. That makes it easier to scale. Lithography was easy. Parallel word lines, parallel bit lines made us push the lithography as far as we could. However, intrinsically, when the lithography music stopped, when we could not pattern any finer than this, when we had to have 3-level quad patterning to get one layer, the cost got out of hand. The second thing that got out of hand is when you bring these bits so close to each other, they are like teenagers. They influence each other. Well, my kids, you tell them not to go out anywhere, 11 o'clock at night, phone call comes, and you don't know where they are. That's what happens here. Adjacent bits, as you bring them closer and closer and closer, they start to interact and start to disturb. And believe it or not, on a floating gate, on 3 bits per cell, on 15 nanometer, per state, we have about 15 electrons. 15 electrons. Imagine, one electron decides to just go into town, we lose 40 millivolts. 40 millivolt variation on one electron. So what happened in the end? Scaling stopped and the music stopped. The Fab 4 were not all together. There was no John, no Beatles. That's what happened. The cost of lithography, density of electrons that went away, and the proximity effect from the adjacent cells, effectively we couldn't scale 15 nanometer anymore. And so we had to have a 3D revolution happen. The 3D NAND cell as a concept was very cool. We decided that the 2D string, take it, flip it, and take it straight up. Easier said than done. We need to figure out now what that cell consisted of. We needed to put a gate and a charge trap layer with a body next to it. And then we needed to integrate this. How do I integrate this into a product that we can actually make? Now we have plates of word line, big holes in the middle, nice cylindrical structure into which we made these bits. Right? This took time to develop, even though the concept came out a while ago. And the architecture itself works beautifully. That just does look like a multi-story building where you have word line plates separated by the source lines and you have memory holes in the middle. Beautiful. Once you do this, because they are circular holes, the proximity effect, the effect of the neighborhood teenage kids calling your kids, that went away. you can see what happened to the 3 problems I said with 2D scaling. Lithography is no longer an issue. We can make it big because we are building multiple layers. We have plenty of electrons to go around, and proximity effect dropped. These 3 gave me a technology path. It is not everything though. It gave me a technology path. So what happened? After a sufficient amount of development, sufficient amount of cooking, we are able to do this. A 64-layer, world's smallest 256 gigabit chip. Density is up to a half a terabit. Of course, we have our roots, we have our USBs. Of course, where are we going? We are going into SSDs. Every one of these products, SSDs, USBs, you can walk over to the Western Digital booth and you can actually play with them. 64-layer with the broadest portfolio that involves client SSDs, retail, enterprise SSDs, embedded products, wherever possible, flash to go into 3D NAND, into 64-layer with that beautiful structure that we are able to make it. And it happens because we hit the right cost point. Till that cost point happened, the technology is just a demonstration vehicle. I can sample a few to you, I can give you a few, but it is not the same as a scalable technology. So we took that, we had our first 24-layer demonstration vehicle. We did not make a product out of it. We made 48-layer last year. We are around 64-layer this year. And of course, this march continues. Please don't try to count any layers on it. I have masked quite a bit off. But you know you are going to get more layers as we do more and more of this. This scalability, this predictability to the customer, that you are going to have a product every year, every 18 months, that is going to be in the scaling path. Surely scaling is going to get more difficult. 3D is much, much more complicated than 2D is, more equipment, more capital cost. We may not get the same rate as 2D, but you do have a proper scaling path. And that scaling path, along with hitting that cost point at 64-layer, is what makes that conversion possible. Meaning, the technology was introduced in 2007. For the next 8 years, you had to work hard to get the cell, the architecture, the materials, the process, the technology. Then the first products get introduced. 2013, in this conference, we saw SSDs, but that didn't cause scaling. We needed to show that we needed to get up to 64-layer before the cost gets competitive. And we needed to show our customers there is a scaling path. Once we had that, that whole mountain of wafers switches over. The dramatic rate at which 2D NAND to 3D NAND conversion happens because all 4 of those characteristics got met. We got met on cost, scalability, scale, and because we could fit into the same ecosystem, into the NAND ecosystem. So the big lesson from the 2D NAND to 3D NAND conversion is, if you had any 1, it doesn't happen. If you had any 2, it doesn't happen. Even if you had all 3 of them, it doesn't happen. You need to have all 4 for you to be able to see that I'll have a technology that will have the scale. The same rules, of course, apply to storage class memories. Without question, the same rule applies for storage class memory. It is always easy to demonstrate a technology. The problem here is DRAM is scaling, again on a log scale. NAND is scaling at the bottom. You can introduce on day 1 that I'm going to be 2 times cheaper than DRAM. But it doesn't become a product. It doesn't become volume. It doesn't get accepted till I show a path that I can be 20 times cheaper than DRAM. because NAND is scaling. Otherwise, that gap keeps on growing. So you need to go look for yourself and say, is there a path to scaling that? Remember, the reason 2D NAND did not scale, main reason was lithography. And I want to make sure that when you look at technologies, the big issues, so for storage class memories, these two are possible architectures. A cross-point architecture, or just like we did in BICS, it's like a layer cake, you deposit all of them and you etch in one go. Those are two separate ways of integrating it. There have to be cells, there have to be materials, there has to be a selector, just like I showed on 2D NAND. You need to have a process architecture that works cost effectively. You got to make a product at the right density and the right characteristics, right applications, and the ecosystem has to fit in. You need to have all of these to work if you are going to have a scalable long-term product. Western Digital, and in our prior generation Sandisk, and in our prior generation Matrix, have been in this business for a long time. Over $100 million of revenue on cross-point memories in the early part of the last decade. We published a 32 gigabit, 24 nanometer, 2-layer ReRAM memory a few years ago. But the more we stare at it, the more we realize, as far as ReRAM is concerned, for ReRAM, a cross-point is not the right architecture. For resistive RAM technologies, cross-point is too expensive because of lithography. Every layer requires additional lithography, critical layer lithography, very narrow lithography. You have to keep piling on. It becomes very expensive. So for us, in the technologies that we are looking at, we are committed to resistive RAM and 3D resistive RAM, and we find that it is scalable. We can scale resistive RAM as a 3D in a non-cross-point architecture. We can produce a large enough density that is interesting to you at low enough cost. And the latency that is needed, the endurance that is needed, so that it can directly talk with the processor on the memory side of the chasm, not on the storage side of the chasm. We think we can make that work. Of course, you can have it on both sides of the chasm, which means you can build fast SSDs, you can build DRAM enhancement, you can build DRAM replacement, and you can build a universal memory over time with this technology. Because it has the latency, it has the endurance that is needed. Of course, it has got the ecosystem support from the large Western digital infrastructure to go with it. And that allows us that we can, with scale, without having to redo capital every time. You don't want to keep changing technologies. You need the capital. You need the capital to produce the scale. For you to produce that Mount Fuji, Mount Kilimanjaro level of wafers to be manufactured, you have to be very conscious of what capital cost goes in it. When we look at this, when we look at all of these factors put together, resistive RAM is Western Digital's choice for storage class memory. We have evaluated all options and we decided this is the way we will go into this market. So I have taken you through the logic of what is storage class memory in our mind. I've taken you through what is needed, the Fab 4 of the semiconductor nirvana, what is needed. I've taken you through the case study of 2D NAND and 3D NAND. What in 2D NAND allowed it for it to become this large. You can see everybody here, this large in industry on flash, what happened? And how is that 3D NAND conversion happening? Why is it happening? Why did it take so long? Even though the technology was introduced in 2007, why does it take till 2017 for 50% of the conversion to happen? And if you apply the same rules to storage class memories, what characteristics does it need to have? That's the reason we are making resistive RAM as our choice. So in summary, with the combination of Western Digital and Sandisk, we have, along with AGST, the largest storage company in the world. The data explosion that is happening outside is requiring us to think about how are you going to extract value out of the data. The edge devices are producing enormous mountains of data. 3D NAND gave us a very nice example of what it takes for a new technology to get adopted. And 3D, for me, I think all semiconductors are going to be 3D one way or the other. So the 3D revolution that is started in NAND will spread across all semiconductor processing. And lower latency memory at a component level, as a building block level, is needed for us to get into this new era of data-centric computing. And 3D resistive RAM is a scalable solution for storage class memories. Thank you.